Welcome to the Theological Lens, where our goal is to see the world, our daily walks, and our worship transformed by the truth of Jesus Christ. Our content is saturated with Scripture, overflowing with faith, and rooted in the good news of the cross. Each episode will proclaim the name of the Lord, calling us to submit to His ways and live lives that glorify Him. With hearts full of thankfulness, we'll explore how Jesus shapes everything, our decisions, our worldview, and our worship, always pointing back to the hope and transformation found in Him.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Theological Lens. My name is Dr. Lynelle Buchanan, and today we are going to dive into a pretty tough topic. This one's a difficult one for a lot of people, and so maybe this should come with a flood warning because I feel this one really deeply. We're going to talk about the heartbreaking topic of infertility today. And if you're joining us today because infertility has touched your life or the life of somebody that you love, you are not alone. This episode is for the couple who has cried in the bathroom over another negative test. It's for the woman who dreads Mother's Day. It's for the man who feels like he's failing his wife. And it's for every believer who is wondering, God, why? But this is also for the woman who feels guilty about telling her friend that she is pregnant again, knowing that it will serve as a reminder of the friend's empty arms. And this is also for the mom who doesn't know how to comfort her daughter. And this is for the pastor who wants to be a voice of encouragement. In other words, this is relevant for you, for everyone. Because even if you yourself have not struggled with infertility, you certainly know someone who is currently walking this difficult road. So today, we're going to explore the increasing rates of infertility. We're going to explore the myriad of medical causes and options and the crushing emotional toll. And most importantly, we're going to look at how God's word can speak hope into every single tear. So grab a tissue. I have my own, and settle in and let's work on this together. Now, you know how I love to start with definitions and statistics for almost every topic, and it feels like the right place to start, and this one as well. So I'm going to start with some definitions. When we talk about primary infertility, it refers to a situation where a couple has never achieved a successful pregnancy despite having regular unprotected intercourse for at least 12 months. Now, if the woman is over 35, they will actually shorten that to 6 months before there is a diagnosis of primary infertility. And for this one, some common causes would include things like ovulatory disorders, tubal factors. There's some factors that come from the male side, endometriosis, and then there are a bunch of unexplained reasons as well. There's also secondary infertility, and that occurs when a couple has had a successful pregnancy, but they cannot achieve a second successful pregnancy. So again, same dynamic. It's diagnosed after 12 months of a lack of success, unless the woman's over 35, and then they shorten it to 6 months again. And in this case, you could have a lot of factors that could have developed after a first successful childbirth, and that might be just aging could do that, or scarring from a previous delivery or surgery. Weight changes can do it, hormone changes can do it, infections can do it. There's a bunch of different causes that can come. And the truth is that the statistics are really kind of disturbing. According to the World Health Organization, and I'm not sure that we should really see them as that credible of a source. However, their statistics do seem to be consistent with other less well-known organizations. They say about 1 in 6 people worldwide, roughly about 17.5% of adults, will experience infertility at some time in their lives. And it's not just an issue of like, oh, couples who can't have kids. This is like your neighbor, your sister, the person sitting next to you in church. And in the United States, it's about 13.4% of women ages 15 to 49 have impaired fertility. And for married women, it's even higher at almost 17%. So it is also something we recognize is getting worse. In the time period between 1990 and 2021, the number of women who are living with infertility exploded with an increase of 84%. And at the same time period, male infertility increased by about 75%. So these numbers are getting incrementally worse. That is leading more and more couples to seek fertility treatments. Now, if we ask why the increase, I think there's a variety of different topics that are actually affecting this. Partly because we're waiting longer to start families. The average age of the first birth keeps climbing higher and higher. And it's also lifestyle and environment and other variables involved as well. About a third of infertility cases come because of a physiological issue with the woman. And that could be an issue with that's like a problem with ovulation, like PCOS, or it could be blocked fallopian tubes. It could be endometriosis. It could be a diminished ovarian reserve of viable eggs. So about 1/3 comes because of a physiological problem from the woman's side. About 1/3 comes from an identifiable problem from the male side. And that could be a low sperm count or low sperm motility or bad sperm development in the process. And that can be linked to a bunch of different things. Heat can do it. Different environmental situations can do that as well. So if a third is because of a physiological problem from the female and a third is because of a physiological problem from the male, that last third is because of a combination of things between the partners or because of something that is unexplained. And unfortunately, there's way too many of those cases where we just don't know why. We know that lifestyle and environmental culprits are often indicted. And that includes things like smoking, excessive alcohol, obesity, chronic stress, even exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals that are in plastics or pesticides or pollutions. Often those things are brought up. But modern life, late nights, processed food, sedentary jobs, delaying family, all of these kinds of variables together have created a little bit of a perfect storm. So as I speak to you today, I want to speak to you not just as like an expert who's researched a topic, but I want to speak to you as a woman who has lived this heartbreak. And that's why this should probably come with a flood warning and why I have my Kleenexes ready. Because my husband and I tried for 4 years to get pregnant. And I hope that in sharing my story, that I can encourage others in a way that some really special people encouraged me during those really, really difficult years. The truth is that infertility runs in my family. And I can go back to my grandma Johnson, who so desperately wanted a child, but she failed to become pregnant month after month. So eventually she adopted my mom and my aunt. My mom once shared with me that grandma was very, very concerned when my mom gave birth to my twin and I. She wanted mom to be very, very vigilant because she was afraid that some woman who was aching because of her empty arms would look at mom's twins and say, I could take one and she would still have one, and just take off with one of them. And I know that it's true. Grandma always did bend a little bit towards anxiety, but I think that that particular fear maybe helps me understand some things about grandma's journey herself. It makes me wonder if she thought that when she saw a mom with twins. Beyond grandma, I am the one of 4 daughters, and 3 of those 4 struggled with infertility. My older sister, she and her husband tried for a long time. They sought some significant kinds of testing. And then after getting that medical advice, they ended up adopting 2 boys. So I have 2 nephews that she adopted. And then my younger sister faced infertility, and that led to the adoption of her oldest, and then to multiple rounds of medical interventions, followed by the absolute miraculous. Because after 2 unsuccessful rounds of in vitro fertilization, in which she got pregnant and then lost those babies, the doctor implanted 2 embryos. One of those embryos split, and she gave birth to triplets. A daughter and 2 twin sons. And that just really special. So my oldest sister, my younger sister, and then my journey was very much complicated because I had endometriosis. This condition creates scar tissue that can be throughout the abdomen, and it can cling to organs and can obstruct the reproductive processes. I was diagnosed with this before I was married. But in those days, maybe the dark ages, we might call them, doctors really did not understand how endometriosis worked. So I got married expecting that James and I were going to get to choose when we had our babies. We had a basic plan that said we would wait until we got him through seminary, so about 5 years, and then we would start our family. And I think when I look back on it, God must have chuckled at our naivety about, we make plans and then sometimes God intervenes, and he certainly did. In the first couple of years of marriage, I ended up having 2 different surgeries for the endometriosis. And both of those surgeries were very unsuccessful in alleviating my pain. So I ended up going down to a specialist in Atlanta for the 3rd surgery. And after that surgery, the doctors met with us and they said, listen, if you hope to have children, then that's something you're going to need to pursue right away because your fertility window is closing. And that certainly wasn't something that we wanted to hear. It was earlier than we had planned, but we were like, all right, we can adjust that plan. Good to know. Let's get on it. Now, because of the complications of our endometriosis, they did not want us to follow normal protocols for infertility. Usually medical doctors will not intervene until the couple under 35 has tried for 12 months unsuccessfully on their own. But in our situation, after only 3 months of no success getting pregnant, then they wanted us to undergo some more rigorous testing. And in the process, they determined that the problem was with me. And maybe if I think about it, that's probably the theme of our marriage. Surprise, surprise, the problem's with me. But in that, I'm really actually grateful. This was quite a blessing to me in the end that the problem was with me. I'm really so glad that it worked out that way because when I was hurting so bad month after month, I could share all of my pain with James. I could dump it out to him unedited without any moderation. And I could share it with him. I know of a situation where an infertile couple was unable to have kids because of the husband. And she shared with me that it was hard for her when she was really, really struggling to share those hurts with her husband because it was like piling on, compounding the pain he already felt for not being able to give her what she wanted so badly. And she didn't want to make him feel like more of a failure. So she didn't want to share her hurts with him as openly as I was able to. So I'm really kind of glad that the physiological problem was actually with me. After only 3 months of trying, the doctors decided that my obstacles were significant enough that they recommended that we start some fertility medication. All right, let's go. So they started me on an ovarian stimulant, and that just happened to be the same medication that Bobby McCowie was taking when she got pregnant with septuplets. Yeah, that's 7 babies at once. Gulp. So I went to pick up that medication from the pharmacy and I read the insert. And I am not kidding, folks. This is what that insert said. It said, warning. This medication is known to cause multiple births, twins, etc. Now, I'm a twin. My dad's a twin. I wasn't afraid of twins, but I was really terrified of that, etc. But the warnings about these risks only served to convince me that our infertility was a short-term problem. Surely this very powerful medication was going to be able to solve my issues. Because apparently the question wasn't so much if we were going to get pregnant, if we were going to have a baby, but how many babies were we going to have at once? So I took the medication and the next day I went to work and I discovered that fertility drugs really are very potent. I found myself very affected by those drugs. I felt like my brain was moving at the speed of refrigerated molasses. And my emotions were highly erratic. I'd always thought of myself as a sane, level-headed individual before they started pumping me full of selective estrogen receptor modulators. Those drugs, they kicked my butt. And while I do believe that those medications made me wildly more emotional, the truth is that infertility is emotionally devastating with or without fertility drugs. And I want to describe what it looks like because those of you who haven't lived it are guaranteed to know somebody who has or is wrestling with it right now. When we started the meds, I had no idea how many doctor's appointments and copays were going to be involved. The ovarian stimulants had to be monitored very, very closely. And that came with blood tests and ultrasounds, and sometimes every few days. So it was both time consuming and focus consuming. There are a lot of dumb things that people say to those who are trying to get pregnant. I have a list. We'll talk about them later. And one of the most overused of those things is just relax. People would say, if you just relax, you could probably get pregnant on your own. Would somebody please tell me how you are supposed to relax when every day you have to be aware of what day it is in your cycle so that you know which medication or which doctor's appointment or which blood tests are supposed to be done that day? It has a way of just consuming all of your attention. And in the frenzy of all of that chaos, there was a thought that at least all the work we are doing will pay off. Like, we're trying the best medications and we have the best doctor, and surely that will make this work. Throughout the month, hope would build with every single intervention. Every time a doctor would finish an exam or an ultrasound and announce that everything looks really good, then it feeds this deep-seated need to believe that this month will be different than the last month. You take the meds and then you do what is important to do during your fertility window, and then you have 2 weeks to wait and find out if it worked. And during that 2 weeks, my mind would play crazy tricks on me. Every twinge in my abdomen and every hint of nausea and every tenderness that I felt in my breasts, I would assume that meant this time it worked. This time for sure. And then my period would be late, because that's, of course, the way it was going to be. So now that's absolute confirmation. After all of those little hints I had, now I'm late. So now I know for sure I'm pregnant. But a couple days later, I would go into a bathroom and be confronted with the evidence that all of that was for naught. Again, I had failed. And the darkness and the grief would overwhelm me. But just a couple days later, I would climb on the roller coaster one more time, and I would do more blood work, and I would see the doctor, and I would start more medications. We'll do it again. And month after month, it took its toll in a lot of different ways, both seen and unseen. The financial cost was significant. We were lucky in that the insurance that we had under my husband's employment actually covered more treatments than most do. But I ran some of the current numbers to give you a sense of what infertility treatments are costing couples today, just to give you a little picture of it. So when it comes to medications, oral medications like the one I started on, those are running about $100 per cycle. Those are the least expensive and the most commonly used at the beginning. And if you get escalated then to one of the injectable medications, like I was on for a couple different years, that is probably going to run today somewhere between $4,000 to $5,500 per cycle. Wow. They're much more powerful. They're much more expensive. And for all of those years of infertility treatments, they also had me on a progesterone gel. And that is about $30 per unit, and you use 1 or 2 units every day for the last 2 weeks of your cycle. So somewhere around 14 or 15 units at $30 per unit, or $30 per unit. And you might have to take 2 a day, and then you're talking about 30 units per month at $30 per unit. Wow. Doctor's visits and consultations, those actually add up a lot. You might do an initial onboarding with a fertility consultation and evaluation, and that could run anywhere from $200 to $750 for a couple, sometimes much higher if you're talking about a comprehensive workup. Follow-up or in-cycle monitoring visits might get bundled into other procedure kinds of costs, but they can add hundreds to your budget, because if your specialist copay is like $45 a visit like mine, and you see the doctors 4 to 6 times a month, that's going to add up. Ultrasounds and blood work are a significant part of what's going on, tracking the follicle development and the hormone levels. And that's typically done multiple times per cycle. And that's going to vary widely by insurance coverage. But some of the fertility doctors who offer this as kind of a package price that as somewhere around $2,000 to $3,500 per cycle. All of those things just really added up, didn't they? Then you have other more complicated procedures like IUI or in vitro, and those add significant cost, with IUI costing somewhere between $1,000 and $7,000. And in vitro, national averages, they're often cited at somewhere between $20,000 to $25,000 per try. That's a lot of money. The financial cost is significant, but to be honest, the emotional burden was probably the hardest. The building of hope followed by the crash of disappointments got harder every cycle. And every negative pregnancy test felt like a funeral. The loss of what could have been, what we had longed for so long, was really, really hard. Even my dreams haunted me. I would wake up from some idyllic scene where somebody placed a newborn baby in my arms, or in some dreams, it might have been a group of children that they just handed to me. And then I would wake with this slow dawning realization that my arms were just as empty as before. That reality was, devastating. So beyond the emotional the cost, the financial cost, there were also relational challenges that come with this time period. Remember, I pointed out this is incredibly time and focus consuming. Like it's going to take all of your energy, and it's certainly financially challenging. So that means that both spouses really have to be all on board and all in on this plan. And then you create this dynamic that is like sex on demand, or sex primarily for the procreation purpose. And that dynamic can be really difficult as well. It was even tough for us socially. We were attending a church that had several young couples, and we shared a Sunday school class. And together, I remember commiserating with some of the other couples about how difficult it was for us to get into the church, to feel like we were sort of welcomed into the congregation. But I watched as couple after couple had their first baby and were all of a sudden in for sure. Like there's baby showers and people going out of their way to come over and greet them and ask how she's feeling. And it was like, oh, the entrance exam for this church is you have to have a baby. Like I watched them get in, and then my husband and I still very much felt out. And then one day the church leadership came to us and announced that our young marrieds class had gotten too big. So the solution to that was that they were going to split it. They were going to take our very, very beloved Sunday school teacher, and he was going to, wait, you see this coming, right? He was going to take the married with children couples, and they were going to go to a different Sunday school class. And then those of us who were married without children, we were going to get a not beloved teacher. So James and I were separated from our friends because we couldn't get pregnant. I had gotten involved in the church and I was volunteering in the nursery, but I had to step away from that because it was just too hard. And then we watched friends and family announce their pregnancies. Well, we stared again at our empty arms. And I know that some of those friends and even my sister struggled to tell us about their joy, because they knew that we were hurting and they did not want to compound our pain. And that was a fair concern, because there certainly were people who would say hurtful things. And sometimes they didn't even know that we were trying, but something would tumble out of their mouths that was like a gut punch. Like the frustrated man who stormed into a meeting and he was late for, and he was clearly very frustrated. He said, "You should be so glad that you don't have to deal with children." Ouch. Or the ones that really suggested to us that we were being selfish and unwise by delaying having children. They had no clue how hard we were trying. They didn't know because we kept much of our infertility struggles very private. And after all, most of the stories, at least the best of the funny ones from that time, were maybe at best R-rated and maybe rated worse than that. Like, honestly, most people would not want to have heard about our journey during that time. And some of it was such a downer that we didn't know how to share it with very many people. Sometimes those that did know still said dumb things that made it less likely for us to want anybody else to know. So here is my list of the greatest hits of stupid things to say to somebody who is dealing with infertility. So the first class of stupidity we have is the just relax classics. People who would say something like, stop stressing or trying so hard and it will happen naturally. Or you just need to take a vacation, go on a trip and you'll probably get pregnant. Or have you tried yoga or meditation or acupuncture or insert some random wellness thing here? These all imply that the problem is either all in your head or due to stress, which dismisses real medical causes like hormonal issues or tubal factors or male factors or endometriosis, any of these things. And then some of them had a suggestion that was the fix it suggestion or the comparison one. And they would say things like, well, why don't you just adopt? As if that's a simple, cheap, or quick alternative. Or the ones who would say, well, my friend or coworker or my cousin's former landlord's best friend's wife just adopted and then they got pregnant right away. Or have you tried insert random unsolicited advice on diet or supplements or essential oils, etc. Guys, I am not kidding you. One person told us that I should stand on my head against the wall for an hour after we had sex and I would guaranteed get pregnant. Another person told me that I should drink half a bottle of Robitussin and that would thin my mucus and then I would have no problem getting pregnant. Gee, I wonder why my reproductive endocrinologist neglected to tell me that this was so easy. Then there were people who said things that were either minimizing or blaming or patronizing. Like, well, everything happens for a reason. Or maybe you're just not meant to be parents. That was lovely. Or don't worry, you're still young. You have plenty of time. Well, that's not what the doctors told me. It ignored the fact that my medical conditions gave me a different timeline than what they thought. Or the person who said, well, at least you don't have insert some other disease here. You should just be grateful. Then there were the very intrusive or blame shifting kinds of comments like, well, whose fault is it? Is it yours or your husband's? Has your husband been checked? Why are you asking these things? Or the people who would throw shade and suggest, well, maybe you're just not doing it right. Snicker, snicker. We seriously had somebody elbow us and say, do you need us to show you how it's done? Apparently it flew over this guy's head that after trying to get pregnant for years, we had plenty of time to develop a level of expertise. That wasn't the problem. And I'll leave that right there. You're welcome. But we heard a lot of other completely tone deaf kinds of remarks like, well, you can have one of mine, because them jokingly offering us one of their kids made it all better. Or after a miscarriage, somebody who said, well, at least now you know you can get pregnant. Or somebody who would say, hey, look, that girl's pregnant again. Don't worry, you'll be the next one. As if that's the way it works. And if these financial or emotional or social kinds of challenges weren't enough, for the believer in Jesus Christ, there is a necessary spiritual dynamic that comes with the challenge of infertility. If you believe in the sovereignty of God, if you read scriptures and see that God closes and opens wombs all through the Bible, then you have some inescapable kinds of questions. I had a very, very hard time when I was assigned a counselee who is a 16-year-old single mom who got pregnant on a 2-night stand. Or when I read an article in the news about a baby who was left in a dumpster because his life was inconvenient to the mother. And I would see these things and my heart would cry out, like, why would God let those women become pregnant and not let us become pregnant? We were trying to do things God's way. We were training for a life of ministry. Why would he give them babies? Why would he give a baby to a mom who is going to throw that baby into a dumpster instead of holding it and cuddling it and nurturing it and caring for it? That's what I would have done. And you gave that child to her and not me. Why? I struggled with questions like, do I just not have enough faith? Because we know faith is important, right? I remember agonizing as I was packing for a little getaway. And if I didn't get pregnant that month, then I should have gotten my period while I was on that trip. But if I packed tampons, did it mean that I didn't have enough faith? Or if I didn't pack tampons, did it mean that I wasn't being a good steward? Like, what am I supposed to do? And at some of the points of the journey, I really tried to make my relationship with God transactional on this. If I do all of these things perfectly, then God will have no choice but to give me a child. He'll have to do that. And I got to tell you, I certainly struggled with Mother's Day at church. It seemed like it was a day devoted to honoring women whose reproductive organs worked. And it was just a brutal reminder that mine didn't. So I stopped going to church on Mother's Day. Even when I was on staff at a church, I didn't go to church on Mother's Day. Instead, I went out to brunch with another woman who was struggling with infertility, and we encouraged each other over brunch at Perkins. I don't know if that was the right thing to do, but it was all I could handle at the time. And the truth is that during those 4 years of infertility, I wrestled with God. I begged him. And there were even times that I railed at him. But his grace continued to rain down on me and he sustained me. And I grew in so many different ways through all of that hard. And at the end of 4 years of treatment, we actually hit a medical crisis. During a fertility treatment cycle, my ovaries became overstimulated. So my ovaries that were supposed to be the size of almonds ended up the size of a large plum or a small orange, like way bigger than they were supposed to be. And as I waddled into the doctor's office, clutching my husband's sweats around my waist because I couldn't get any of my pants on, I couldn't stand up all the way. And the pain was excruciating. The doctor explained that we had more viable eggs that month than we ever had before. This was our best shot out of any of them at getting pregnant. But if they treated my pain, then that would lower our chance for pregnancy. So he's like, you got to decide. Do you want me to give you something for the pain, knowing that it's going to jeopardize this best chance we've ever had? Or do you want to try to go without it? And I chose to go home and suffer for 2 weeks. And I'm going to tell you, suffer I did. I was terribly, terribly bloated. And I was in a lot of pain. It was one of the first times in my life that I ever remember specifically thinking, I have to call people and have them pray for me, or I don't know how I'm going to make it. And I did. I called in all the prayer supports. But it was still a really brutal couple weeks. And it was somewhere in the middle of that 2 weeks of waiting that I realized that if this cycle didn't work, I didn't know if I could keep doing it, knowing that this was a possibility. I just didn't know if I could do it anymore. But I didn't want to say anything to my husband because I didn't want to. How do you close the door on behalf of your husband and say, well, I'm going to make the decision that says you will never have a child of your own? I didn't know that I could do that. But in God's grace, a couple of days later, my husband came to me and said, honey, I just don't know if we should keep doing this. It was so hard for him to watch me be in pain. So God brought us to the same place at the same time. And I'm so grateful for that. That's certainly his grace. So we went back to the fertility doctors one more time and we said, is there anything that we missed. And the doctor explained that we hadn't tried in vitro, but because of the specific challenges that I had, he didn't expect in vitro to be successful for us in the first place. So it was certainly cost prohibitive. How would we make that work as a young couple married and going through seminary? But even if we could afford it, he didn't think it was something that would be successful for us. It was a pretty grim picture that he painted. So we went home to grieve. And in this case, I would say the grief is layered because there's a mourning of all of the effort that we put into this that came to nothing, because in all of those months and months and months of difficulty, it had yielded only 2 very, very short-term pregnancies. Pregnancies that I lost right after discovering that I was pregnant. Like, they just didn't last very long. There's a grief for the child who never was. There's a grief for the future that you had planned. I sent a letter to a friend trying to kind of like spell out all of the loss that I was feeling. And I said, even if we adopt, I'll never know the waddle of pregnancy. I'll never know what it's like to see my husband's eyes and my son's face. I'll never know what it's like to nurse my newborn. And so as the door closed with such finality for us, and as hope just drained away, the truth is my heart just ached. And I can't even begin to measure the tears of that time of life. But God, in his great grace, a few months later, opened the door for James and I to become residence directors at Baptist Bible College as James finished seminary. And we had an apartment right in the middle of a women's dormitory. I threw myself into that role, and all of those college girls, they became my babies. We lived with the door open and an endless parade of young women folded right into our family. My heart still ached, but I had a new mission to consume my energies. And midway through that year, my husband asked me what I was going to do with my life if I couldn't have kids. And it was a really good question. I hadn't thought that far. I mean, my life plans had been where I'm going to marry somebody going into ministry. He's going to be a pastor or a missionary, and I am going to raise kids, and I'm going to support the ministry. I got a counseling degree so I could support the ministry. Let's go. I'm ready to support his ministry. And if there wasn't a need for me to be home with kids, and if we wanted to move towards adoption, we were going to have to find a way to get a job. So what's that job going to be? I hadn't thought that far. And as I thought about it, I said to him, I think I would love to have that open counseling faculty position at Baptist Bible College. But there's no way they are going to hire me. I'm 26 years old. I'm a female. The ink is hardly dry on my master's degree diploma. Like, those people are not going to give me that job. And I'm going to tell you, after 6 different interviews, those crazy people gave me that job. It was amazing. My contract started on June 1st. I was so excited. And that weekend, we had gone away for a little getaway. And as we were on the way home, driving back from it, all of a sudden it occurred to me that I couldn't remember when my last period was. After all of those years of having to track everything so tightly, it was such a relief to not have to know what day it was, so I didn't track it really at all. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, when was my last period? And as soon as I thought that, I recognized that was such a dangerous thought, because that thought could breed hope. And hope only ever leads to disappointment and devastation. So as we got back to the apartment, James ran out to pick up some pizza at town. And I quick called a friend and I said, would you please run to CVS for me and pick up a pregnancy test? And the truth is, I did not even want James to know that I was about to waste another $10 on pregnancy tests. Used to be crazy expensive, folks. You could not get them at the dollar store. And I did not want to admit that I was going to waste another $10 on a pregnancy test that we already knew what the result was going to be, but I had to do it so that I didn't hope, because hope was so dangerous. So this dear friend ran out to the store. She got back before James did. I went right into the bathroom and took this pregnancy test. And I have to tell you, friends, I took a lot of home pregnancy tests. I did that a lot over those 4 years. And every single one, I had faithfully waited the entire 5 minutes, just hoping somehow that little pink line would bloom. And I would analyze so tightly stare at this test. Is that a little bit of peach? Does it look a little pinky? I can't tell. I think it may be, just with so much just longing and hope in my heart. And I got to tell you, this test, I took it and immediately there is a bright pink solid line like I had never, ever seen before. I didn't know what to do with that. My contract started June 1st. This is June 2nd, folks. And so as I came out of the bathroom, this dear friend looks at my face and she took off. She yeeted herself right out of there. And a couple minutes later, James walked in and he looked at my face and he said, "Honey, what's wrong?" And I put the test down on the top of the pizza boxes. I'm going to tell you, I'm not sure he's ever forgiven me for that, but I had put the cap back on it. It was really okay. And I said, "James, I think we're pregnant." And instantly he went into expectation management and he said, "Oh, honey, please don't get your hopes up because we both know how this ends." And he was right. The next day I called my doctor and I said, I need to order up a beta pregnancy test and this blood test and that blood test. And within a couple days, he had called us and had us go into his office and he took me right over to his ultrasound machine that he had right there. And together we looked at a little dot of light on that screen. This little baby was only the size of a grain of rice, but we could see the little heartbeat go squitch, 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 squitch. It was beautiful. We went back to his office and he had my file and at my paper file, because dear young ones, medical files used to be on paper in file folders, in file cabinets. So he had this file for me that was almost 3 inches thick because it was all of the months and months and months of fertility treatments and tests. And I mean, this was a ream of paper. And then he had the blood work that I had just done, the beta pregnancy test. And he said to me, "I can't tell you what made the difference between this stack of paper, the before, and this one sheet of paper, this after." And the good news is I didn't expect him to be able to tell me the answer to that. But I knew the one who had orchestrated it all. My contract started June 1st. I found out I was pregnant June 2nd. Now, across that summer, the news of my pregnancy started kind of leaking out because this was before Facebook. So it just kind of had to run the rumor mill. And as people discovered it, I would get phone call after phone call from people who were so excited for us. And I learned about God's goodness to us. I learned about people who prayed for us. I knew that on the day of prayer that year, all of the girls in the dorm had stood outside my apartment door and they prayed that God would give us a baby. But I didn't know that for the rest of that semester, the smaller group of girls had met in the upstairs lounge every Saturday morning to continue to pray. I didn't know how many of their parents prayed for us. I didn't know how many people that had been talking to God on our behalf. And that was so encouraging to discover. I still spent most of that pregnancy afraid to be sure. I didn't buy things for a long time because, I don't know, I think I was still expecting that there was some devastation still to come. But God allowed our miracle to be born in January of 2003. And as Matthew grew out of things, I gave them away because I had zero expectation that there would be another miracle. I knew what a gift this child was. And I would never presume that God had more for us. I knew what all the obstacles were. I knew about every single challenge that we had. When Matt was almost 2 years old, I had another surgery for endometriosis. And my surgeon was the same doctor who had done 3 years of our infertility. And he had delivered Matthew. And as he pulled the staples out after my surgery, he very flippantly said to me, why don't you just go get pregnant? This would be a good time to get pregnant. And I was furious. I think as I went out to our vehicle after the appointment, like there was smoke coming out of my ears, I was so upset because he was so casual about it. And he knew better than anybody that that's not the way that it works for us, because he had been right there with us with treatment after treatment after treatment after treatment. How could he just say that as if it was that easy? Well, my friends, just a few weeks later, I discovered that I was pregnant. And that August, I delivered my second son. And when Chris was about 7 months old, I got a terrible, terrible stomach bug. It was rough, folks. And when you're a mom to littles, you share all the germs. So about 4 days into that horrible stomach sickness, I started going, wait a second, why have my boys not gotten this sickness? And then all of a sudden it struck me. So I called my husband, who was at church for a youth group, and I said, honey, I think I know why the boys haven't gotten my stomach bug. And he went, I'll pick up a test and bring it home. So that particular stomach bug was actually morning sickness, courtesy of my daughter, Bethany. God showered James and I with his goodness. And I've sometimes had people say to me, don't you wish you would have known up front that God was going to send you the kids? Because then you could have skipped all of that infertility drama. Wouldn't that have been great? And I actually disagree. If I had not been on that journey, we would not have grown in our relationship together or grown in our relationship with the Lord in the same way that we did. And God's timing was so crucial because he had a life's mission for me that I did not know how much I wanted. I thought I was going to be a stay-at-home pastor's wife, but he had a career ministry for me. If he would have given us children when we first started trying to have them, I never, ever would have pursued my teaching career. He waited until he guided me into that role, and then he opened my womb. He gave me so much more, exceedingly abundantly above what I would have asked or imagined. He gave me life way more abundant. I am so grateful that I have this story of God's grace. But there are many women who don't have the same story. And maybe God never did open their wombs. But I believe that his grace is still great. And I appeal to Scripture for my support. Scripture does not sugarcoat infertility. In fact, it really does describe the heartbreak of it really well. You can look at some of the women that God used within Scripture in some really mighty ways, but that struggled with this. Sarah was 90, so she laughed in disbelief when God said that she would have a son. But she did. He's one of the patriarchs for the children of Israel. And Rachel cried, give me a child or I'll die. I understand that feeling. And God eventually opened up Rachel's womb. But her journey taught her that children are a gift and they're not a right. And her son, who was born at just the right time, became a mechanism for God's deliverance of his people during a terrible famine. Hannah poured out her soul in the temple, and she was bitter and weeping and so distraught that a priest thought she was drunk. God gave her Samuel, and she gave him back to the Lord, and he was instrumental as God's prophet. These stories show that infertility is not always punishment. Sometimes it's the very soil where God grows faith that cannot be shaken. It's interesting. Psalm 113:9 says, He settles the childless woman in her home as a happy mother of children. That happy mother may look like biological kids or adoption or spiritual motherhood. I've known some women who never had children of their own, but their powerful role in the lives of children. In fact, I can think of some who've had such a powerful role in my own children's lives, was something that should never be underestimated, something that absolutely should be celebrated. And maybe the role is that settling into peace with whatever God's plan is. In a culture that is obsessed with very intrinsic ideas of fulfillment, the Bible reminds us that fruitfulness is ultimately about multiplying God's glory, not our family name. And glorifying God is a reflection of selfless fulfillment of his purpose, not our own. Romans 8:28, you should be familiar with this passage. And it says, and we know that in all things, God works together for the good of those who love him. And that good is described in the verses just after that. That good is being conformed to the image of Jesus Christ. God works in all things, including negative pregnancy tests and empty arms. My barren season became a rich soil for personal, relational, and spiritual growth for me. And friends, if you are in that struggle, please hear this. Your story is not over. God is writing a testimony that will glorify him, whether the ultrasound shows a heartbeat or leads you down a different path of purpose. So I want to end this episode a little differently than what I usually do. I want to take a moment to pray for those who are in this difficult season. And I would ask if you would just join me in praying for them. Father, you who opened Sarah's womb and heard Hannah's cry, meet every listener in their pain, comfort the brokenhearted, strengthen weary marriages, and remind us that you are enough. Whether through miracle or medicine or adoption or surrender, draw each closer to your heart and be glorified in whatever comes next. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I'm sorry for the emotional nature of this one, that, you got to what is real and genuine in my heart and my journey and in my worship. So if this episode helped you, then please like and subscribe, share it with somebody else so it can be an encouragement to them. And until next time, grace and peace to you.
If you enjoyed what you just heard, we invite you to like the episode and, if possible, leave a positive review. If you know someone who could benefit from this content, please share it on your social media. We also ask that you subscribe and follow so that you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. We are so glad that you chose to be with us today. We hope that you will join us again next week on The Theological Lens.